The new year is all about making changes. Now, if you stick to those changes or your promises that you made, that's a different story. But as we head into 2025, there are 10 NBA teams that have yet to accomplish the biggest feat. And then, of course, that is to win the Larry O'Brien Trophy. So, going into the new year, which team is most likely to change their ways? Let's talk about it. Now, before we dive into the Jazz here at number 10, what I do want to say is that if you're having a party for New Year's or if you're going out or whatever the case may be, just be safe. It can get crazy, of course, on the road and wherever you're at around the new year and holidays like this. So just be safe. But that is enough. Let's get into the NBA, right? At number 10, it is the Utah Jazz. Now, in these rankings, I looked at, of course, your record, right? Your seeding. And then if you were to make a miraculous run, how likely is it that you can go through your conference and get to that point so you have a chance to even go to the NBA Finals? So, again, looking at your conference, your situation, your roster, your direction, all of that good stuff, right? And I think you guys will be able to pick up on it as we go. Now, these first couple teams we can go through kind of quickly. The Jazz, you're 7-23. You're 14th in the Western Conference. And outside of Lauri Markkanen, who respectfully has had a bit of a down year, right? His numbers are a little bit down from last year. It's a very young team, right? You have some nice young pieces like Keyonte George, who's had his best career year, only second year, but still point remains. Walker Kessler is still a defensive monster, needs to work on his free throw shooting, but outside of that, he is a great five-man here going forward for the Utah Jazz. Look, you have a lot of young pieces, but as far as competing for a title, it is far too early, and I'm putting you at number 10. Now, at number 9, I have the New Orleans Pelicans, right? You're 5-27. You're actually 2 games worse than the Utah Jazz, and you're 15th in the Western Conference. The only reason that I have this team above the Utah Jazz is that, well, if their star players do come back, I think they have a better chance than the Utah Jazz to make this miraculous run and to get into the play-in, because that's the conversation for these teams now, and to make a run, right, with a guy like Zion and Brandon Ingram, which is, again, a combined 50 points per game, coming back into the lineup. I'm going to give them the edge to win this, I guess, their first Larry O'Brien in 2025 over the Utah Jazz. But again, both are long shots. It's not going to happen. Now, the Pelicans, such a talented team, top to bottom. So many great role players like Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, even CJ McCollum at this point in his career. But they've just had so many injuries, and I'm excited to see, or I guess I'm intrigued to see what they do with Willie Green going forward. Do we hold on to him? Do we get a new coach? Do we expect that to fix our problems with a guy like Zion and his inconsistencies with his health? And number 8 is the Brooklyn Nets. Look, not only is their conference a little bit easier, respectfully, I'm a Cavs fan, so again, Eastern Conference, we all know, is a little bit easier. But they're also 5 games better than the 2 teams below them, at least 5 games better. Now, this is a team that has already traded some of their veterans, and we knew that was going to come this season. Now, they just traded Dorian Finney-Smith, so I didn't take him off the graphic. But again, he's played a good chunk of games for the Nets this year, and he was giving them about 11 and 4 with, again, a steal a game. We'll talk about him at the end of the video as we'll touch on that D'Angelo Russell trade. But they also have traded Dennis Schroeder to this point, who was giving them 18 and 6 to start the year. This is a team that has overperformed, I guess, and that's a crazy statement to say as they are 12 and 20 at this point in the season. But again, outside of some splash games from Cam Thomas, who they just got back from injury, or Cam Johnson, they're just a super young team as well in the Eastern Conference. I think they have kind of hit their peak, at least I'll say that. I can't see them winning more than 20 games this season, so of course that's far away from the play-in, let alone the playoffs. I'm going to have them at number 8. At number 7, this is kind of the same argument as the Pelicans and the Jazz situation, where it's just the star player factor, and of course, in this case, the conference as well. Now, LaMelo Ball for the Hornets, when he's playing, he's giving them 35, 7.5 a night. Of course, efficiency is even a little bit up from previous years. He isn't at an MVP level when he is playing for this Charlotte Hornets team. And when they're playing, he always gives them a shot to win the game. So it's never an off night for teams that are playing the Charlotte Hornets when LaMelo is suiting up. Now, again, Brandon Miller's giving them good nights. Miles Bridges has been rebounding crazy, right? One of the top rebounders on this team. But outside of that, he's been back to where he was before, of course, his suspension. Nick Richards, of course, a block and a half a game. Nice numbers from certain individuals on this team, but it's the horrendous defense, right? And it's the fact that this team is ultimately really, really young. And of course, they don't have a lot of continuity together with all the injuries and suspensions to Miles Bridges. This is a team that is 7-24, but if they were to make a run to the play-in, I like their chances a little bit more than, let's say, a team like the Brooklyn Nets. Moving over to number 6, now we can start talking about teams that actually might have an outside shot at actually making a deep run into the playoffs. Of course, 7 through 10, or we all know, right? They have no chance this year. But at number 6, we're talking about a team that nobody expected last year, but they made it to the conference finals in the Indiana Pacers. Now, you might be saying, Owen, why do you bring that up? Well, last year at this time, I called it. I said the Pacers were going to go to the conference finals. Of course, I called that in the preseason, but regardless, this year they're 16-17. Not ideal to say the least, but despite being under 500, they're still 8th in the Eastern Conference. We know this is a team that when they get hot, right? And we saw in the playoffs last year. Now, they had some injuries go their way, of course, on the opposing teams, but when they're hot and when they're running up and down, making their shots, they can beat just about anybody in a one-game setting here in the NBA. For the Pacers, look, you have the pieces. It's just about finding your rhythm. But at this point in time, it does look a little bit shaky there in Indiana. And if the Tyrese Halliburton can't go back to being a 20-11 guy like he was in the latter half of last season, I don't know how much of a shot this team has to make a deep run and to win the finals. I like at least 3 teams in the Eastern Conference more than them this season, at least, again. So they're at number 6. At number 5 is the LA Clippers. This is a bit of a long shot, but I mean, hey, Kawhi Leonard is around the corner, and that is why I think you could argue they could be even higher than number 5. But 18-13 at this point in time. Ty Lue is coaching his ass off at this point in the season, quite honestly, but James Harden has stirred the pot yet again. He is back to looking like vintage James Harden, and I've said this all season where his numbers aren't Houston Rockets James Harden, but I believe his impact is Houston Rockets James Harden level. 22, 6.5, and 8 a night. Fantastic numbers from James Harden across the board. Now, Norman Powell has been the shock of the year for the LA Clippers, a guy that's given him 24 points a night, and he had a lot of words to say before the season about Paul George's departure, and he's living up to it. So shout out to Norman Powell. Zubac has had his nights, but again, 12.5 rebounds a night. All bigs look good with James Harden running with them. Now, Kawhi Leonard coming back to this team, I'm interested to see that dynamic. How is he brought into this? Is he shot right back into being the 1A where it's his team, everybody work around me? Or is he going to kind of just come in and just be a superstar role player? And role player, again, hear me out on this, where he's going to be the kind of like, hey, if they need me, I'm going to be the guy to take over. Kind of like Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland, where I'm a Cavs fan again. If you watch the Cavaliers play, every single night, Donovan Mitchell doesn't take over unless the team needs him to take over, right? Usually it's Darius Garland and Evan Mobley running the show. So in LA, I think James Harden and Norman Powell can run the offense, and then in those dire moments or in those droughts offensively, that's when Kawhi Leonard can be like, hey, give me the ball. I got us. And he can go out there and give them a very impactful 18 to 22 points a night. And if he can ramp up slowly and come playoff time, if he's healthy, Kawhi Leonard can still guard anybody in the world. I'm pretty confident in that. So this team is at number 5, but again, it's Kawhi Leonard's health that keeps me at number 5 and not any higher going into the playoff stretch. How much can we rely on a guy like his, I guess his track record of health? I'll just say that. And number 4 is Minnesota, a team that I know what I'm getting on a nightly basis, but it's the superstar factor that I know is going to be there, unlike the Clippers with Kawhi Leonard. Anthony Edwards, and in this Minnesota Timberwolves team, made a run to the conference finals last season. Now, this year, it's been a lot of smoothing out. I'll say that to say the least. This is a team that, of course, made some moves in the offseason. Questionable moves. Getting rid of Karl-Anthony Towns, bringing in Donte DiVincenzo, and, of course, a guy like Julius Randle was definitely a questionable move, right? But for a team like Minnesota, you know, you still have Anthony Edwards, a guy that his willingness, I think, is the key this year for this team. His willingness to step out and consistently knock down the three-point shot is going to open up things for this offense when it matters most. And I think it just matters of what can we consistently get around Anthony Edwards in the playoffs. Of course, last year we saw some games where Anthony Edwards wasn't showing up, and Karl-Anthony Towns was that guy that got them over the top in those games. Naz Reid even for one of them. But can Julius Randle do that? Can Julius Randle be that guy that occasionally if Anthony Edwards doesn't have it going, I can drop 30. I can drop 25 and 11 to get us over the top when Anthony Edwards doesn't have it going at an elite level. That's going to be the biggest question for me with this Minnesota team. I don't know if the spacing is there to be a championship level team. They just have that guy, a top 10 level guy in Anthony Edwards, that no matter what can win you the game. Regardless, eighth in the Western Conference at this point in time. I think I like so many teams more than them in a 7-game series, so they're at number 4. Now, as we move into the top 3, these teams are interchangeable. And let me clarify, and number 2 really should be my number 1. It really depends on the health of some of these guys in these top 3. But I will say this. A team that I like more than the Timberwolves to win the NBA Finals this year is the Memphis Grizzlies. And I'm not jumping on the bandwagon here. Go to my preseason power rankings. I had this team as a top 5 team going into this NBA season. I was amazed how quickly people forgot how good this team was when Ja Morant was healthy and playing with the core around him. And then this year, people were ranking them 7, 8, 9, 10th in the Western Conference, and they were saying that this team was going to fall off the face of the mountain. I didn't see that. I didn't see that, obviously. And I believe that this team is playing better than even I expected going into this, at least this far into the season, 33 games in. They're 22 and 11, second in the Western Conference. They're a couple games back from the Thunder, and they just lost to the Thunder the other night, so that one kind of hurts as far as seeding, but they weren't expected to be the 1 seed. I think if you can end the season with a 2 or 3 seed, you're going to have home court behind you going into the entire playoff stretch. Ja Morant's going to be playing every single game, and again, you have the defense. I would have loved if they could have actually made the move for a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith. That would have been huge. But I think, honestly, if you can get a Cam Johnson, if you can get one of these 3-and-D wings that are on the trade market just to have another veteran depth piece, I think that's going to be huge for this team that, it can help them when it matters most and when you need that spacing around a guy like Ja and Jaren Jackson Jr. But shout out to Santi Aldama. I think he's going under the radar this season, 13, 7, and 3. His impact is far better than his numbers. And again, I think honestly he's the 3rd best player on this team, maybe even the 2nd best player on this team as far as his impact this season. So shout out to Santi. I want to give him his love, but the Grizzlies, given the fact that I think I would take the Thunder more than I would take the Thunder over them in a 7-game series. Of course, that's what keeps them at 3. But of course, you can argue this team to be at number 1 or even number 2. So hear me out when I say that. At number 2 is the Orlando Magic. If you can get Franz Wagner back, and if you can get Paolo Banchero back, this defense can beat anybody in the NBA in a 7-game series. And I will stand by that statement. But the thing is recently the star players haven't been there, and that's why you're 4th in the Eastern Conference and not fighting for the number 1 seed. If you had Paolo and Franz with this all-NBA defensive team, seemingly from top to bottom, you have a chance against anybody. And I think I like your chances against the Cavaliers. Again, I would hate to say that as a Cavs fan, but in a 7-game series, I think the physicality of the Magic and the fact that they're going to have something to prove, of course, coming off that playoff series loss last year against the Cavaliers, I like their chances pretty much against anybody but Boston. But, I mean, hey, if Boston gets knocked out, or hey, if you match up against Boston, that could be a series where Paolo can show out. That could be the series where Paolo puts his stake in the ground and says, I'm a top 10 level player. Of course, coming off this injury, that would also be a huge statement. But again, the defense for me was the key in the little bit of a weaker conference there in the Eastern Conference. I'm going to go with the Orlando Magic at 2. Again, Grizzlies, Magic easily could be at 1. And at number 1, I'm going to do it again. Is this delusion? It probably is. But at number 1, it is a team that has not been able to stay healthy. And when they were healthy, they were 8-2 in their first 10. And on the year when Devin Booker and Kevin Durant were healthy, they've been like 12-3 or 12-4 on the season. It's the Phoenix Suns, guys. I said this before the season, and do I still stand by it? I don't know. But I think in a 7-game series, they might be maybe 1 or the 2nd biggest threat to the Oklahoma City Thunder as far as the Western Conference goes, and I stand by that. All right, I think they might be a top 2 threat to the Oklahoma City Thunder. It's because they have those guys that could be top 10 level players, arguably the 2 best bucket getters in the league in Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. And you also have the defense, right? I mean, when Devin Booker and Kevin Durant are both healthy for this Phoenix Suns team, This is a team that has been a great defensive team under Bud, and offensively, of course, they've been there, of course, with these star players that they do have on that side of the ball. I like this team top to bottom. Again, they have those killers, those cold-blooded guys that you could give the ball to, and they could single-handedly win you the game, no matter how good Caruso might be, or Lou Dort, or collectively, the defense from the Oklahoma City Thunder. Devin Booker can have a night. Kevin Durant can have a night, and they can pull off an upset here in the playoffs. Now, again, we also saw that this team went to the playoffs last year and got completely embarrassed in the first round. But again, a different coach, right? Different schemes here for the Phoenix Suns this year, and some different pieces like Tyus Jones, just to name one. But again, this Phoenix Suns team just has those guys that can win you any game. So that is my list. Of course, Phoenix Suns, the Magic, and the Grizzlies are the only teams I can really see maybe changing their ways here in 2025. But of course, let me know what you think about the list down below. Of course, some spots definitely could be switched either way. Now, I want to finish the show off today, of course, covering the recent trade. We had D'Angelo Russell, seemingly in a full circle moment, going back to the Brooklyn Nets, getting traded from the Lakers to the Brooklyn Nets for the second time in his career. That doesn't happen often, but what does each team receive? If you're out of the loop, of course, I'm going to fill you in. The Brooklyn Nets received D'Angelo Russell. Of course, he's on an expiring contract, so he's going to be gone either this year or after next year. They get Maxwell Lewis, a nice young piece that they can potentially develop here down the line, and 3 second-round picks. Now, those picks are, I think, better than people imagine, just because of the fact that LeBron's not going to be there pretty much for any of these second-round picks, so they could pretty much be higher second-round picks is what I'm getting at here. But for the Lakers, you made a trade that makes sense. It makes so much sense. And again, this is a trade where I'm sure Dorian Finney-Smith's numbers are going to go down in the shooting department because every good shooter that gets traded to LeBron James, that's just what happens. But again, Dorian Finney-Smith was the perfect pickup for the Lakers, and he's going to fit so nicely in the starting lineup next to a guy like Rui, LeBron, Anthony Davis, and Austin Reeves. Just gives them that guy that can go out there next to Rui and guard, let's say, for some reason the Lakers make the finals. You got a guy that can guard Tatum, and you got a guy that can guard Jaylen Brown, and then you also got AD to protect the rim. I like this move for the Lakers for a multitude of reasons. It can guard so many different wings and guards in the Western Conference now. And again, Dorian Finney-Smith is not the Kawhi Leonard realm of the world, but he's a pretty damn good defender. So Dorian Finney-Smith, love that pickup for the Lakers. Even if his offensive numbers are not there, defensively his impact will be. So we love the pickup for the Lakers as far as that regard. Now, handing out grades, I don't want to hand out A's too early, right? I think, honestly, you can make an argument that this is an A-minus trade for both sides of the coin because the Brooklyn Nets, you get young draft capital or a young piece with Maxwell Lewis and draft capital. You also bring back D'Angelo Russell, who was a fan favorite in the community, even though that he's going to be gone here pretty soon. But for the Lakers, again, you get a much-needed piece in Dorian Finney-Smith. So, honestly, you can make the argument that these could be at least A-minuses for both sides of the coin, as I circle around to that point yet again. But I'm going to hold back on the A plus grades, I guess the A realm of things. I'm going to wait to see how things play out. But I'm going to give a B to Brooklyn just because that, I think maybe you could have sneakily got a first-round pick from, let's say, the Milwaukee Bucks for a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith, and I would prefer 1 first-round pick over 3 seconds. That's just me, but if that wasn't on the table, then of course that wasn't on the table. But I think definitely getting a first could have bumped this up to a B plus for me. But for the Lakers, again, on paper, you get the perfect fit for this team to make a deep run. And of course, JJ Redick loves Dorian Finney-Smith as well. So let me know what you think about that trade as well if you made it to this point in the video. But I'm going to say this, episode 239, this year has been a fantastic year for the podcast. This is the second year, right? We're about 2.5 years in. But I will say this, ending off last year, we had about 8,000 subscribers. This year, we are about at 18,000 subscribers. So we've more than doubled our subscribers in the last year. So I want to thank you guys at home, whether this is your first video or your 239th. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Of course, the support has been amazing this year. And that's really all I want to say. Again, to another year, we're going to continue to grind. We're going to continue to give you guys the best content possible. And we're going to be back on Thursday for our Week 18 NFL predictions. But again, have a fun but safe new year. And of course, just make responsible decisions, at least the best you can, right? I'll see you guys in 2025. No pun intended. Go have fun and enjoy the new year.